All right, get ready to dive deep into something I think we could all use a little help with. Listening.
I think you're right.
It seems simple enough, but there's a whole art to it we're going to explore today.
Mm-hmm.
Our guide for this deep dive is Patrick King's book, How to Listen with Intention.
Sounds fascinating.
It is. And I think we'll uncover some stuff that might surprise people about why they're not quite as good at listening as they think they are.
Interesting.
So, to kick things off,
Yeah.
King opens with this mind-blowing Harvard study showing that when people share something, it actually lights up the same reward centers in the brain as, get this, food and sex.
Really?
Yeah, wild, right?
Wow, so it's like we're biologically wired to want to talk about ourselves. Makes you wonder why we struggle so much to listen to what others have to say.
Totally. We're all about broadcasting our own experiences, but receiving them, maybe not so much. This kind of ties into what King calls conversational narcissism. You familiar with that?
I am. Yeah, it's that tendency we all have, even when we think we're being attentive, to kind of pull the conversation back towards
Right.
ourselves.
So, like, how does that actually manifest in real conversations?
Well, there's some really insightful research on this by a sociologist named Charles Derber. He distinguishes between what he calls support responses and shift responses in conversation.
Okay. I'm vaguely remembering those terms, but remind me.
Okay, so imagine somebody tells you they love French cinema. A support response would be something like, "Oh, tell me about your favorite film."
Right.
A shift response, on the other hand, would be like, "I'm more of a book person. Have you read that one I was telling you about?"
Huh. So you're not outright dismissing their interest, but you were kind of subtly shifting the focus back to yourself.
Exactly.
I could see how that could make the other person feel unheard, even if it's unintentional.
It can really derail a conversation, and it happens all the time without us even realizing it.
Which brings us to King's perspective on what we call, boring people.
I like how he reframes that whole idea. He argues that it's not that some people are inherently boring, it's more about us not really investing the effort to discover what's interesting about them.
So, like, maybe we just haven't found the right questions to unlock what makes them tick.
Right. He encourages approaching every conversation with a sense of genuine curiosity. What if we treated it like meeting a new culture for the first time, with that anthropologist's mindset?
Oh, I love that.
Really cultivate that curiosity and ask those open-ended questions that invite people to share more deeply.
So basically, don't assume you already know everything about someone or what they might have to say.
Exactly. King even uses talk show hosts like Conan O'Brien as a kind of surprising example of this.
Really? I wouldn't have thought of that. Why Conan?
Well, think about it. He's so good at making his guests feel comfortable and like they're the most interesting person in the room.
Makes them want to open up and share more.
Right. And he does that through his genuine curiosity, making them feel valued and heard.
Fascinating. So we've talked about conversational narcissism and the need for curiosity, but King also goes into those different listening styles that people have, right?
He does. He identifies four main ones: people-oriented, content-oriented, action-oriented, and time-oriented.
So like each style has its own strengths and weaknesses when it comes to listening.
Exactly. Being aware of your own dominant style is important, but it's even more crucial to adapt to the speaker's style.
So it's like you're using the right tool for the job, depending on who you're talking to and what they need from the conversation.
That's a great way to put it. For instance, if someone's venting to you about a tough day and you immediately jump into problem-solving mode, it might not be what they need at that moment.
Right. Sometimes people just want to be heard and understood, not
Yeah,
necessarily given advice or solutions.
exactly.
That's where those frames he talks about come into play, right?
Exactly. It's like we each bring these unspoken goals or expectations to a conversation, these frames. When those frames clash, miscommunication happens.
All the time. It's like talking different languages. And speaking of different levels of listening, King outlines those 5 levels, from basically ignoring someone to the holy grail of empathetic listening,
Ah, yes, those
where
levels.
you're not just hearing the words, but truly understanding the speaker's emotions, their perspective. It's like the ultimate goal of listening.
I agree. It's about creating that space where the other person feels deeply heard and understood.
I'm already getting inspired to level up my own listening skills.
Yeah.
I'm sensing there's going to be some practical guidance coming up. What do you think?
I think so. King gets into some really useful techniques for actually putting all this into practice.
I can't wait to dig into those. Should we take a quick break and come back to it?
Sounds good to me.
All right, so we've talked about the science behind sharing and conversational narcissism, different listening styles, and those unspoken frames we bring to conversations. But now I'm ready for the how-to. How do we actually become better listeners?
Well, one really powerful tool King highlights is validation. It's about acknowledging someone's feelings, even if you don't necessarily agree with their perspective.
So, like, if a friend's having a rough day, instead of saying, oh, it's not that bad, you might say something like, that sounds incredibly frustrating.
Precisely.
Oh.
And it can make a huge difference in how the person feels heard and understood.
It seems simple, but I can see how it could be easy to slip into those dismissive responses without even realizing it.
Right. King provides a helpful two-step process for validation. First, identify the emotion they're expressing.
Got it.
And second, try to justify that emotion based on their experience.
So you're not saying they're right or wrong, but you're acknowledging that their feelings make sense in the context of their situation.
Exactly.
Makes a lot of sense. And I think he mentions a 6-step framework for validation too, right?
Yeah.
Developed by someone named Kate Theata.
He does. Those steps include being present, reflecting accurately, reading their behavior, understanding their history, normalizing feelings, and showing what she calls radical genuineness.
Radical genuineness. That's an interesting phrase.
It is, isn't it? It's about responding authentically, without judgment.
Like meeting them with complete openness.
Exactly, stripping away any pretense or preconceived notions.
I'm seeing how this ties into building trust and connection, creating that safe space for open communication. It seems like emotional intelligence plays a big role in all of this too.
Oh, absolutely. King talks about Daniel Goleman's 4 domains of emotional intelligence and how they're all essential for becoming a better listener.
Remind me what those 4 domains are again.
Okay, so we have self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and relationship management.
Right, right. And how do each of those relate to listening specifically?
Well, self-awareness helps us recognize our own emotional triggers so we're less likely to project our own baggage onto other people. Self-management helps us regulate our emotions so we can respond thoughtfully instead of just reacting impulsively.
So we're less likely to derail the conversation with our own drama, basically.
Exactly. And then social awareness allows us to tune in to the other person's emotions, reading their nonverbal cues, sensing what might be going on beneath the surface.
And relationship management helps us navigate those complexities of interpersonal dynamics.
Precisely. It's about building those strong connections through clear and empathetic communication.
So basically, it's all interconnected. We're developing our emotional intelligence to become better listeners, better communicators, and ultimately better at building relationships.
That's the goal.
I like it. So we've covered validation and emotional intelligence, and now I want to touch on something King calls subtext.
Ah, subtext, that unspoken language beneath the words.
It's so fascinating to me, but sometimes it feels really hard to grasp.
It can be tricky. It's communicated through tone of voice, body language, context, all those subtle signals that can often speak volumes.
Like when someone says, I'm fine, but their tone is flat and they're avoiding eye contact.
Exactly. You know something else is going on, even if they're not saying it directly.
But how do we get better at recognizing and interpreting subtext? It's like a secret code sometimes.
It is a bit like that. King suggests paying attention to those discrepancies between what someone says and how they say it, noticing those inconsistencies.
Okay, so look for those mismatches between the words and the nonverbal cues.
Right. Also consider the speaker's history, their experiences, their personality. All those things provide context for understanding what might be going on beneath the surface.
It's almost like becoming a detective of human behavior.
In a way, it is. It requires that same kind of careful observation and attention to detail.
Which ultimately brings us back to those 5 levels of listening we discussed earlier.
Yes, that spectrum from ignoring to empathetic listening.
I think most of us probably fluctuate somewhere between ignoring, pretending to listen, selectively listening, and maybe attentively listening sometimes.
Probably true for all of us.
But that 5th level, that empathetic listening, that's where the real magic happens, right?
It is. It's about transcending our own self-centeredness and truly entering the world of the speaker. We suspend judgment, we quiet our own internal monologue, and we just try to be present with their experience.
It sounds almost meditative.
It can be. It's about recognizing that listening isn't just about receiving information.
Right.
It's about connecting with another human being on a deeper level.
Wow. I'm feeling a shift in my own awareness just thinking about this. So what's next? Where do we go from here?
Well, let's explore some of those specific techniques and strategies King outlines for becoming more active and empathetic listeners. He's got some great tips for putting all of this into practice.
All right, we've covered a lot of ground: the science of sharing, conversational narcissism, the power of validation, emotional intelligence, and even subtext.
We have.
But I'm really eager to get into the practical stuff now.
Hmm.
How do we take all this insightful theory and actually turn it into better listening skills?
Well, that's where King really delivers. He gives us a whole toolbox of practical techniques, starting with a deep dive into what he calls active listening.
Active listening, okay.
It's about really engaging with the speaker, not just passively absorbing information.
So you're demonstrating that you're present, that you're invested in what they're saying.
Exactly. And he outlines 9 specific techniques for doing this.
9. Okay, help me remember. There's comprehending, retaining, responding, restating, reflecting.
Mm-hmm.
What else?
Summarizing, labeling emotions, probing.
Oh, and the strategic use of silence.
Wow, that's a lot to keep track of.
It is.
Can we break down a few of those, maybe starting with probing? What does that actually look like in a conversation?
Probing is about asking insightful questions that encourage the speaker to delve deeper into their thoughts and feelings.
So not like an interrogation, but more like gently guiding them toward greater self-awareness.
Right. Think of it as helping them unearth their own insights.
I like that. What about labeling emotions? Labeling emotions is simply naming the feelings they're expressing. So if someone says, ugh, I'm so overwhelmed with work right now, you might respond with, it sounds incredibly stressful.
Okay, so you're acknowledging their emotional state, not just the content of their words.
Exactly. It shows a deeper level of understanding.
And it validates their experience.
Hmm.
Okay, so we've got probing and labeling emotions. What about reflecting? How's that different from restating?
Well, restating is simply paraphrasing what they said to make sure you understand. Reflecting goes a step further. You're mirroring back not just the content, but also the underlying emotions.
Okay, so instead of saying you're swamped with work, you might say you sound completely drained and burnt out.
Exactly. You're adding that extra layer of empathy and understanding.
Got it. Now, one technique I found surprising was the use of silence. It seems counterintuitive in a conversation to just stop talking.
I know, but silence can be incredibly powerful.
Yep.
It gives the speaker space to gather their thoughts, and it allows you to truly absorb what they've said.
It's about resisting that urge to fill every gap with words.
Right. Sometimes those quiet moments are when the most profound communication happens.
Okay, silence. I'll have to practice that one. Now, you mentioned earlier that we can learn a lot from master communicators like talk show hosts. I'm still curious about that. What makes them such good listeners?
Well, think about someone like Conan O'Brien. He's amazing at creating a safe and inviting space for his guests.
He makes them feel comfortable.
Exactly. They open up because they feel like he genuinely wants to hear what they have to say.
It's almost like he's saying, tell me more, I'm all ears.
Exactly. Pay attention to how these masters use body language, tone of voice, and even their questions to draw people out.
So we can learn by observing those subtle cues and trying to embody that same spirit of receptivity.
Absolutely.
Now, with all these techniques and frameworks, it can feel a bit overwhelming. Where do we even begin?
Start small. Pick one technique that resonates with you and focus on that during your next conversation.
Okay, so maybe just try to consciously label emotions this week, and then next week try something else.
Exactly. As you get more comfortable, you can gradually incorporate more techniques into your repertoire.
And remember, it's a practice, not a performance.
It is. Be patient with yourself. It takes time to develop any new skill, especially one as nuanced as listening.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into intentional listening, what are some key takeaways from King's book that you think our listeners should remember?
Well, how about we distill it into 10 essential points for them to ponder and put into practice?
I love it. Go for it.
Okay, so number 1, remember that sharing is as rewarding as food and sex. That tells us how important it is to be receptive to what others want to share with us.
Makes sense.
Number 2, be mindful of conversational narcissism. Notice those subtle ways you might be pulling the conversation back to yourself, and instead, practice those supportive responses we talked about.
Okay, got it.
Number 3, cultivate curiosity. Approach every conversation with that sense of wonder, believing there's always something fascinating to discover about the other person.
Okay, curiosity. What's next?
Number 4, recognize that there are different listening styles, and not everyone communicates the same way. Be aware of your own dominant style and learn to adapt to the needs and communication style of the person you're talking to.
All right, different listening styles. Got it.
Number 5, strive for empathetic listening. It's about going beyond the words to truly understand the speaker's emotions and perspective, make them feel seen and heard.
Okay, empathy check.
Number 6, embrace the power of validation. Acknowledge and accept the other person's feelings without judgment. Create that safe space for them to express themselves authentically.
Validation check.
Number 7,
Right.
develop your emotional intelligence. Work on those 4 domains we discussed: self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and relationship management. They're all crucial for becoming a better listener. Number 8, learn to decode subtext. Pay attention to those nonverbal cues, the tone of voice, the body language. Look for the hidden layers of meaning beneath the surface.
Fascinating stuff.
What else?
Number 9, master those active listening techniques. Probing, reflecting, summarizing, using silence strategically. These are all powerful tools for engaging more deeply and demonstrating understanding.
Active listening techniques. Okay, last one.
Number 10, observe and emulate the masters. Watch how skilled communicators like talk show hosts make their guests feel comfortable and eager to share.
Great advice. So we have 10 key principles to guide us on our journey to becoming more intentional listeners.
It's a journey worth taking. Listening is an art, and it takes practice.
It does.
But the rewards are immense. Truly listening can transform our communication, our relationships, and even our understanding of ourselves.
Beautifully said. So, to our listeners out there, I encourage you to take these insights and apply them to your own lives. Practice with intention, and you'll be amazed at the power of truly hearing others.